We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You're listening to Carousel Sniper Victim, a Dead Glass Design production, with your host, Sean Jeffrey.
There's no doubt in my mind that the police dismissed Bill's death as an accident because he was gay. The police should be held accountable.
Police today are announcing three rewards of $100,000 each for information relating to the disappearance and suspected deaths of two gay men and the death of another in Sydney during the 1980s. Gilles Mccain, a 27-year-old French national living in Bondi, was last seen walking along the coastal walking track at Tamarama on the 15th of September 1985 by a neighbour. He was not reported missing until 2002, with the coroner later finding that he was deceased. Ross Warren, a 24-year-old news presenter from Wollongong, was last seen driving along Oxford Street, Darlinghurst on the 22nd of July 1989 after socialising with friends. His keys were found 2 days later on rocks below the cliff top at Marks Park, Tamarama, and his car was located nearby. His body has never been found, but the coroner found that he was deceased also. And John Russell, aged 31, a barman who worked in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, was last seen alive drinking and socialising with friends at a hotel in Bondi on the 23rd of November 1989. His body was found the next morning at the bottom of the cliff top at Marks Park, Tamarama, suffering injuries consistent with a fall from a cliff. The circumstances surrounding the three incidents have been the subject of a review by the Homicide Squad's Unsolved Homicide team in recent years, and those reviews have been based on a coroner's findings that they were suspicious in nature and possibly the result of gay hate-related crimes.
The following reading is from a 2013 Sydney Morning Herald article. Two boys play cards at the Keelong Detention Centre, south of Wollongong, in April 1991. "Tell me some good stories, you cunt," says one. "What about fag bashing?" asks the other. And this 17-year-old inmate does not disappoint. "It was heaps of fun," he says. With sadistic relish, he regales his fellow prisoner, and another, at Sydney's Minder Detention Centre a few months later, with his reminiscences. He reckons he was 12 when he started. He talks about hunting in packs of as many as 30 youths who would ambush homosexual men and punch and kick them and stomp their heads, from Alexandria Park to King's Cross and Centennial Park to Bondi and Tamarama. They'd go, quote, cliff jumping and push the gays over the edge. "Ah, help, help," he mocks one victim. "Heaps funny. Used to love how they scream, eh?" The headlines are his trophies. "Got heaps of clippings at home, man, from all the poofters we bashed, eh?" "You're a sick puppy, mate," says his new friend at Keelong. "It's a sport in Redfern. It's a fucking hobby, mate. What are you doing tonight, boys?" "Ah, just going fag bashing." He does not realise, but both his friends are wearing wires. He is currently being held in custody because he murdered a man. Him and his 7 mates. They will become known as the Alexandria 8, or as one article I read named them, Sydney's Shame. This following reading is from Chapter 12 of Crime Investigations Australia, written by Ian Parry Okerden. It would later be filmed and televised as part of Bloodsport, the Bondi Gay Murders, which is still available now on YouTube if you'd like to look into it further, although I warn you it's pretty heavy viewing. In the winter of 1989, Ross Warren, a successful television newsreader, was attacked by a gang of thugs. in a park beside the cliffs above Sydney's world-famous Bondi Beach. First they surrounded him and began tormenting him. "What are you doing here?" one of them snarled. "You a poofter?" another waved an iron rod menacingly. "Come here, faggot, and take your punishment." Ross was bashed about the head and face, and then kicked viciously as he lay on the ground, trying desperately to protect himself. Finally, he was dragged to the cliff edge and hurled over onto the rocks below. To this day, Ross Warren's body has never been found. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, a series of violent murders took place near Sydney's famous Bondi Beach. 3 innocent men were attacked and thrown to their deaths from a cliff top. The murders were part of a much wider wave of violent hate crimes as a gang of youths roamed Sydney's inner suburbs, randomly bashing and killing gay men for sport. Among the victims at Bondi was Wollongong television newsreader Ross Warren, who we mentioned just earlier. A gay man, Ross disappeared while visiting friends in Sydney in 1989. Ross Warren's case was dismissed by police as a probable accident. But his mother conducted a long campaign to have her son's disappearance finalised. Some 10 years after he was first reported missing, Ross's police file finally came to the desk of one courageous investigator who started to dig a little deeper. Detective Sergeant Stephen Page, now retired and working in the security sector, quickly realised that there was more to the Ross Warren case than was uncovered in the original investigation. The file contained a great many unanswered questions. As he read the file, Detective Page began to uncover similarities with other murders, and slowly, the shocking pattern of violence and death began to emerge. Quoting an article by investigative journalist Rick Fennelly, "Dozens of killers are now walking free. Up to 80 men were murdered, and at least 30 cases are still unsolved." Former Detective Sergeant Steve Page says society would not have accepted so many unexplained killings of women, children, teachers or doctors. "We dropped the ball," he says. But now the gay hate gangs would be approaching middle age. They've been living with the guilt. A few of them might want to relieve that burden and give these poor families some answers. Another murder victim was Bondi resident John Russell, a gay man who had inherited some money and was about to leave for the country to start a new life, when his body was found at the foot of the Bondi Cliffs. Russell's body was found in a position at the base of the cliffs that indicated to the investigators that he had been thrown, or at the very least, pushed from the cliff top, rather than any accident or act of suicide. The long list of murders of homosexual and transvestite people from the Sydney area during the 1980s and 1990s is frankly pretty terrifying to research. Gerald Cuthbert, 27, was stabbed 64 times in a Paddington unit on October 17th, 1981. Giles Mattiani, 34, disappeared around Marks Park, Bondi, Tamarama on September 5th, 1985. The coroner found in 2005, 20 years later, that it was most likely a murder. Raymond Keem, 43, martial arts expert, was savagely bashed in Allison Park on January 13th, 1987. Scott Johnson, 27, whose body was found near the base of North Head, near Manly, on December 9th, 1988. Police announced a $100,000 reward in February after a coronial inquiry overturned the original finding of suicide. Ross Warren, 25, was the Win TV news presenter who disappeared at Marks Park, Tamarama, July 23, 1989. John Russell, 31, was thrown from the cliff tops as well at Marks Park in Bondi on November 24, 1989. Cyril Olsen, 64, whose body was found bashed and then drowned in Rushcutters Bay on the 22nd of August, 1992. John Bedser, an antique dealer, was stabbed in his own shop at Parramatta Arcade on December 2nd, 1980. Wayne or Wendy Brennan, a transvestite and sex worker, was shot at King's Cross in April 1985. William Allen, age 50, was bashed at the same gay beat as John Russell, the Alexandria Park Toilets, December 28, 1988. Samantha Ray, a transsexual whose body was found in a cave at South Head beneath the HMAS Watson Naval Base on March 20th, 1989. John Gordon Hughes, 44, was found bound and gagged with electrical wire, his throat cut, and bashed with a lamp and bowl with a pillow slip over his head in his unit at Greenough Avenue in Potts Point on May 4th, 1989. Graham Painter, 36, was found at the base of a 50-metre cliff with his jeans around his knees and his jumper over his head at Tathra Beach on the south coast in October 1989. William Dutfield, 41, a former jockey, struggled with his assailant before he was bashed to death with a metal tape dispenser in his Mosman unit on November 19, 1991. Crispin Dyer, 41, a musician and longtime manager of rock group AC/DC, was bashed to death near the Taylor Square on the 23rd of December, 1993. Kenneth Brennan, 53, a teacher, was stabbed in his security unit on Elizabeth Bay, June 13, 1995. Carl Stockton, 52, was bashed to death with a blunt instrument between Cleveland and Burke Street in Surrey Hill after drinking at the Cleveland Bar on Melbourne Cup Day, November 5th, 1996. David Rose, 41, a cross-dresser and computer programmer, died of head wounds in his Kensington unit, December 20th, 1997. All of these murders still, to this day, remain unsolved. If you know something, do the fucking right thing. So now a little history about some of the fucking insane laws that Australia used to have, alright? Lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender rights in Australia have gradually progressed since the late 20th century, almost now to the point where the LGBTQ community have most of the same rights and protections as other residents, although still with the notable exception of marriage. Australian colonies originally inherited their laws from the United Kingdom, including the Buggery Act of 1533. These were retained in the criminal codes passed by the 19th century colonial parliaments and subsequently by state parliaments after Federation. Same-sex sexual activity between men was considered a capital crime. resulting in the execution of people convicted of, quote, sodomy. Different jurisdictions gradually began to reduce the death penalty for sodomy to life imprisonment, with Victoria the last to reduce the penalty in 1949. Over a 22-year span between 1975 and 1997, Australian states and territories gradually repealed their sodomy laws as support for gay law reform grew. South Australia was the first jurisdiction to decriminalise male homosexual activity on the 17th of September 1975, with the Australian Capital Territories decriminalisation proposed in 1973 and approved by the Fraser federal government coming into effect on the 4th of November 1976. Victoria followed on the 23rd of December 1980, although a, quote, soliciting for immoral purposes provision added by Conservatives saw that police harassment continued in that state for several years. The next jurisdictions to decriminalise male homosexuality were the Northern Territory on the 4th of October 1983 and New South Wales on the 22nd of May 1984, and after 4 failed attempts, Western Australia on the 7th of December 1989. Western Australian Conservatives imposed a higher age of consent and an anti-propaganda provision as a trade-off for the decriminalisation of homosexual activity. Queensland legalised male same-sex activity from the 29th of November 1990 following a change of government. This just left Tasmania, whose government refused to repeal its sodomy law. Tasmania's continued refusal to repeal the offending laws led the Commonwealth Government to pass the Human Rights Sexual Conduct Act of 1994, legalising sexual activity between consenting adults throughout Australia and prohibiting laws that arbitrarily interfere with the sexual conduct of adults in private. In the 1997 case of Croom versus Tasmania, Rodney Croom applied to the High Court of Australia to strike down the Tasmanian law as inconsistent with the new federal law. The Tasmanian government repealed the anti-gay laws after failing to have the matter thrown out in court. So basically, up until 20 years ago, Tasmania still was refusing to grant the same rights to gay citizens as it did to anyone else. And up to today, with the Postal Survey for Marriage Rights going out this week, the issue, as crazy as it sounds, is still ongoing. I, for one, think that years of abuse and assault, coupled with government oppression and the fear of being thrown off a fucking cliff, and the police not doing anything about it, all because they see you as a lesser part of society, is probably reason enough to allow gay people the same rights that we all take for granted. Marriage is outdated anyway. Who cares who wants to marry who? Just leave people the fuck alone and let them live the way they want to live.
This is a statement on behalf of Ross Warren's family and John Russell's family. For the past 20 years we have been haunted by the deaths of Ross, John and Shields, and suspect that there are witnesses or others who have information about these matters that are similarly haunted by the knowledge that they hold. We would implore you to take advantage of the rewards being offered so that not only may our haunting be resolved, but in some small way, your haunting may also be relieved.
The rewards of up to $100,000 each are for information which leads to the arrest and conviction of the persons or people responsible for the deaths of Mr. Mccain, Mr. Warren and Mr. Russell. If anyone has any information in relation to gay hate-related crimes, we want to hear from you. If those matters relate to suspected homicides, we particularly want to hear from you at the Homicide Squad.
Officer has engaged suspect vehicle in pursuit. Confirmed. Pursuit engaged. All units be advised we have a pursuit in
We
progress.
interrupt our
Units on
program to
premises,
bring you
all
this
clear and
important
stand by to assist.